Welcome to the HR Empowerment Podcast, where we will uncover strategies and new insights from HR professionals who discuss up-to-date regulations, best practices, and the most pressing topics like diversity and equity, leadership, dealing with difficult situations, and much more that affect your bottom line and business. Thanks for joining us.
Every complaint shouldn't go to HR. Don't we wish? Seriously though, every complaint shouldn't go to HR. We have to train our managers how to manage so that every complaint doesn't go to HR. The problem that I see is HR allows this to happen and then HR is upset about it. So for you HR people that are listening, please repeat after me. HR is not the complaint department. What I want to talk about in this series of podcasts is what type of complaints should go to HR, what type of complaints should go to someone other than HR. Let's figure out some guidelines and processes for both the manager and the employee to resolve conflict. Because conflict is a pretty big deal, but conflict can be productive. I also want to talk about accountability, and not just performance accountability, but behavior accountability. And then communication. So what type of complaints do go to HR? Well, it's going to be different at every organization, right? I have my idea of what should go to HR, and it should really be the things that are going to end up in court. But let's face it, in some companies, that could be everything. So it depends on who you have in your company, how big your company is. Are your employees trained? Are your managers trained? Are your directors trained? Do you have team leads that are acting as supervisors, or are they truly team leads of projects and just helping their coworkers? So there's no just magical list of what should go to who. It depends on who acts as what. Is a director really a manager, but they've been promoted to director because we needed somebody in that role, but they've never actually been trained? Training is super key when you're determining who handles what type of conflict and what kind of complaint. So first you need to figure out what are your primary causes of conflict and why do employees typically go to HR right now? These could range from anything from harassment and discrimination, which you betcha that stays in HR, but of course, management has to be involved in that because they're probably the cause of it or the witness. How about things like salary? Does that go right to HR? Heck, half the time, HR isn't even the person that is in charge of salary. HR is given a budget and told what to do with it. So we're not really in charge of salary. In ideal situations, managers or directors, depending on what you have in your organization, should be able to be involved in that salary discussion. They should know what the guidelines are, how people get raises, who gets raises and why, what the budget is all year, and what the consequences are too. So HR might be the gatekeeper, but that doesn't mean they're going to just say, sure, Bill, you want a raise? No problem. Let's make that happen. There's a lot that needs to happen behind the scenes. I find that a lot of primary causes of conflict and therefore complaints comes from things like gossip, just personality conflicts. People aren't getting along because of their personality style, their traits, or something happened on a personal level at this job or outside of work and they don't like each other. A lot of other things comes from constructive feedback or lack of constructive feedback. Division of work. One employee feels that they're getting the bulk of the work and other people are getting away with things. Most of those items should be handled by the direct supervisor. Now, I want to do a little caveat here because often supervisors aren't properly trained on how to handle these items either. So for the sake of argument's purposes here, we're going to go through the rest of this podcast and assume, aka pretend, that your supervisors have been properly trained on how to manage people and how to supervise people, what the company policies are, what the company practices are, what are the steps to resolve conflict, get a raise, hire somebody, terminate somebody, promote somebody, change a job title. Same with the managers and directors, if they're the titles you even use. What are career paths? What are the options for training and development for all staff? How do I get somebody approved for training? How do I get them in a development program? How do I hold people accountable for their performance? What are the risks? How about behavior? How do we hold people accountable for their positive or negative behavior? And how is that connected to the company values as well as the mission and vision of the organization? Other items that are more on the legal side are probably always going to end up in human resources, but that doesn't mean HR is responsible for those items. They're definitely responsible for educating other people and making sure T's are crossed, I's are dotted. Legal issues, employee health, health insurance, FMLA, FLSA, any kind of benefits and disability, of course, as well. And then, of course, harassment and discrimination, which we're going to hope nobody has in their organization, but we all know we're all at risk, especially when you bring it to the fact unconscious bias. And that's another item. Have you trained your managers and your supervisors on unconscious bias? Have you gone even a step further and trained your employees on unconscious bias? You see, all of these items are primary causes of conflict. What is the main cause of conflict in your organization, or maybe your division, or maybe your department, all the way down to this specific employee who's sitting at your desk today saying, I have a complaint and I want to fill out a form? HR is never going to turn somebody away, but sometimes HR needs to learn how to redirect somebody to say, thank you for bringing that to my attention, but that's actually your manager who handles that. Do you need some advice? Do you need some coaching on how to talk to the manager? Because I can help you with that. And or walking over to the manager, do you need advice? Do you need coaching on how to handle this situation? Because this is in your court, not mine, HR person. So it would be nice if you could literally develop like a visual communication tree. You could put it in your handbook, you could put it on your intranet. It says, hey, if you have these types of problems, you go to your supervisor. If you have these type of concerns is a better word than problem, right? You have these type of concerns, you go to your director. If you have these types of concerns or questions, you go to human resources directly. A visual communication tree is going to be very helpful to get things out of the HR department that should have never been there in the first place. You're also going to need to develop guidelines and processes for everyone to resolve conflict. So not just managers, but let's train these adult humans, our employees, and even for folks that are employing, teenagers. Why don't we train them while they're young and how to resolve conflict with another human being versus always running to the human resource department or even their director or manager? You as human resources, though, do need to train your managers how to handle conflict, how to handle complaints. And then when it comes to you, you need to delegate it back to them. Follow up with them, of course, because some of them may say, I don't care, or I'm overwhelmed, or I don't know what I'm doing and I don't want anybody to know because I don't want to lose my job, so I'm just going to brush this under the rug. The first thing that you should be doing with your managers is making sure they're fully aware of all the jobs that are underneath them. So are there job descriptions? Do they know how to interview? Do they know the interview laws? Do they know what they can and cannot say per law and then per your internal organizational structure and guidelines? Do they know where the forms are? Do they know how to use the forms? Do they know what the terminology is? So is there an improvement form? Is there a counseling form? Is there a coaching form? Is there a review format? And even if the forms aren't there, because I really don't care about the forms, I care about the actual conversation and then some kind of documentation, even if it's on a napkin, some kind of documentation. Okay, I'm kidding. Don't really put it on a napkin. But some kind of documentation that the employee gets that says, oh, yes, this conversation happened, and I can verify that the conversation happened, even though I didn't like it, even though I don't agree with it. So the best thing to do is, if you don't have forms or you're considering doing training on forms, have your managers look at them and dust them off and say, this form doesn't make any sense for my department. Can we make some adjustments so that it makes sense for all of our departments? Wouldn't that be nice? You're using a form that actually makes sense for all departments. They're often cookie cutter and they don't even make sense for that organization, never mind all the roles in that organization.
Thank you for joining the HR Empowerment Podcast, brought to you by Aurora Training Advantage. We hope you've gained new insight and strategies to navigate the HR profession. We look forward to you joining us again on the HR Empowerment Podcast.